So we're starting a new sermon series this week. It's called Say What? That's not in the Bible. That's what it is. It's looking at all these phrases that you and I, or we hear, or something like that. These phrases that we hear and say, oftentimes that we assume or think that they're good Christian phrases, but actually they're not. They're not in the Bible. And what we end up finding is that many of these phrases aren't actually all that helpful, that they end up putting people in the law more than taking them out of it. And I have a good example of this because Midge and Ed just sent me pictures all the way from Pennsylvania. And they sent me first a picture of them on their chairs saying hi to the congregation. Isn't that nice? But there's an issue with it. They could hear a collective say what? Because they're not holding their wine. And people are like, say what? This is a Lutheran church. We can have wine in a Lutheran church. So they also sent this second picture of them toasting the congregation with their wine. So thank you guys very much. This week's phrase you've probably heard before. Perhaps you've even said it. It's okay if you have. I have too, lots of times before this. But the phrase is, God won't give you more than you can handle. Right? Have you heard about this one? Yeah, of course you have. When do you hear this? When has this one been said to you? When have you said it? It's usually in times of crisis, right? Like during the times of a pandemic. You've just been laid off. You're forced to homeschool your kids. You have bills that are coming due. The stock market's crashing. And you have to be with your spouse and your kids all the time. Right? Like it can be a ton. We usually hear it. It's a bunch of pressure on us. And I've seen a lot of people that's kind of their personal mantra is that, yeah, like God won't give me more than I can handle. And when I see them in their own lives, when suffering befalls them, when suffering falls onto them, when something bad happens, they usually just buckle in and go. They buckle in and make all these things happen, and they take all the pressure onto themselves. And you can see them getting closer to burnout. You can see them getting closer to hurt. And we see this, what's one of the things we're talking about with our daycare that we're building here. The thing that we've noticed and what we've learned about caring for Alzheimer's patients is that caregivers often die before the patients that have Alzheimer's. And it's because they try to handle it themselves. So I want you to listen to the phrase again, God won't give you more than you can handle. Because we say that, and it comes from the nice parts of us. It comes from the parts of us that want to be encouraging, that when we say it to one of our friends that are hurting, we want to alleviate some of their suffering. That's where it comes from. And it comes from a good place. But listen to it. God won't give you more than you can handle. And that phrase means you have to handle it. And it puts all the pressure on you. It's saying basically that God wouldn't give you more than you can handle it, so you better handle this. And it just puts all the pressure on us. So what does the Bible actually say about this? The Apostle Paul in the beginning of 2 Corinthians actually talks about what we're talking about right now. And that's what Piper read just a little bit ago in the service. And the context for the reading is comfort amongst suffering, because the people that Paul was writing to, the Christians in Corinth there, they were going through persecution, which was leading to suffering, and some may even die. And Paul, if you notice, doesn't say, come on guys, straighten up. Get your act together. Handle it yourself. He doesn't say any of that. He doesn't say, God won't give you more than you can handle. No, listen to what he actually says here. This is chapter 1, verse 8. For we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. It's bad. It's real bad. Like when you begin to despise for life itself, like you've gotten past to where you can handle it on your own, right? That's something that you cannot handle. And whether it's God, life, or whatever is causing this persecution for you to have, you're given too much. It's bad. And notice what Paul says. He doesn't say, just come on, you could do it, just handle it. And I don't know if it's God all the time, but I do know that life oftentimes is more than I can handle. Like you get sick and it's more than you can handle. You have a loved one that dies and it's more than you can handle. Your income was doing pretty well when you were looking and booking trips and having fun with that, and all of a sudden there's nothing there anymore. And it's more than you can handle. And all of a sudden you become a caregiver. And it's more than you can handle. All these things, they just become a mess in our lives. And we often feel this burden that we need to be able to handle it ourselves. And so when we feel like we need to handle it, we kind of reach out to God and we go, okay, well, then I need to pray more. I need to do more. I need to read my Bible more. I need to go to church more. In fact, I'm going to watch like 6 live streams from all my different pastors that I used to go to. And even I'm going to watch the live stream from the giant church down the street. Because then if I start doing everything correctly, then maybe finally I can handle it. And that's what the Pharisees taught in Jesus' day. That if you lived good enough, if you lived by the law and the commandments, that if you were holy enough just like them, then the Messiah would finally come down on high and everything would be made right. Because they viewed that they were living in another captivity. They just believed that Rome was the new captors. And I'm sure that there were little plaques everywhere about everything, quoting Old Testament scriptures saying that if they would just honor me and bow down and pray to me and worship me, then I would heal their land. And the Pharisees were serious about that. And they viewed it was their job to put that burden, that heavy burden of living up to their expectations of spirituality so that people would finally act right, so that God would finally come back and heal the land. They were putting the burden on the people. And man, I hear that a lot today. Like it's so tempting for me to even say stuff like that. To put the burden on you guys so that you'll act correctly, right? But I hear it from so many other people. I was talking to someone this week that they were talking about previous churches, and it was such a burden. And I hear people talking about the pandemic that we're in now. And it almost seems like people are saying that if we would just accept the burden of God onto ourselves right now, then God would finally see us and all of this would then just blow away. But that's such a heavy burden. And it's in these responses to the Pharisees that Jesus calls out the burden that they are placing on the people. Like he calls it out. In fact, he's kind of clever in how he calls it out. As I get deeper into the Gospels, I'm always amazed at how Jesus throws all manners of shade at those Pharisees and the scribes and the religious officials and everyone that's in charge, right? Like everyone that wants to put a burden onto the people then and on you, Jesus throws a whole lot of shade at them. And let's look at what he did. This is actually from our gospel lesson. Matthew chapter 11, beginning with the 28th verse. He goes, "Come to me, all who are labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Right before this, he says, come like a child. Come like one that is just unhindered, right? Come like one that is just unburdened in what is happening there. And he says, I will give you rest. We see that life gives us oftentimes more than we can handle to the point of death, to the point where we cannot handle it anymore, and look to Jesus because he handles it. Even death itself, he handles. And the Father raises Jesus up from the dead. Now listen, Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And if he said that without any suffering, if he was just walking around eating berries and drinking wine and eating bread with the disciples, he's like, hey fellas, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You feel me? If he said something like that, it would just be empty words. But that's not what we see with Jesus. We see that he went to the cross. That he went to the cross himself, and it wasn't a time that I think sometimes we get this stoic Jesus view that he's like, I'm just going to the cross to save everything and all that. But no, the view in the Gospels is this Jesus is going through something that he can't handle. When he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's literally, it says that he begins sweating. It's almost like drops of blood, his sweat. That's a picture of someone who can't handle the situation. And we see when he's on the cross that he yells out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Like it's Jesus himself lives through a situation that he cannot handle. But God rose him from the dead. And because of that resurrection, we know that life is coming to us too, because he brings it to ourselves. Listen, I know there's situations out there that are really incredibly difficult. And in the Christian life, we know that Jesus says, take up your cross daily and follow him. And some of you, you are going through crosses right now. Some of you have gone through crosses in the past. And some of you have even heard those words, God won't give you more than you can handle. And people are saying that to you while you're on the cross, right? But what I think we are to do in those situations of suffering and hurting and pain is that we actually look around and we see where we are. We look around on the cross and we look and we see, it's like, I'm on the cross here. Here I am. And when we begin to look around, we'll look to the side and we'll actually see that Jesus is on the cross next to us. And we will yell out to him, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he will look at us and say, today you will be with me. Because our Father will never leave us or forsake us, no matter what happens to us. He will be there for us. This is what Paul is talking about. We read that earlier part in Corinthians. We're going to read the next few verses now. It says, indeed, we felt that we had received the very sentence of death. See that? But that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. You see that cross connection there? He delivered us from such deadly peril, and he will deliver us. Most likely he's talking about being fed to lions and tigers in not the Colosseum, because he wasn't in Rome, but they had like the mini Colosseums and stuff around there. Like that's probably what he's talking about. But he says that he will deliver them. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again. incredible hope. So Jesus isn't giving us just empty words when he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He is saying to finally just realize that God has us, that we are going to go through sufferings, but when you go through the suffering, you don't have to handle it on your own. You can give it away. You can look around and see the situation that you are in, because he's saying, I am there with you. So how do you handle this then? When you have a friend or a family member that's going through their own cross situation, when they're going through their own pain, what do you say to them then? Well, I think first is you acknowledge their suffering. You acknowledge the cross. You acknowledge that it's painful of what they're going through. And then the next thing you tell them is that God is with them. That God is on the cross himself with them, suffering right there with them, and that he will lead them through to resurrection, and he will never leave them or forsake them. And that's what my message is for every one of you, that no matter what you're going through right now, no matter what your friends are going through, God will never leave us. And that we don't have to put the burdens on ourselves when we're going through suffering, that we can put the burden on him, because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And I think that's good news.